Hey, so today I'm gonna summarize and explain the craziness that's going on in Syria. So before I get into that, I'm gonna explain what the Arab Spring is. The Arab world was ruled by oppressive dictators and army generals since the independence of colonial powers in the second half of the 20th century. The government was extremely oppressive and corrupted, which gave young people little to no hope of prosperity. The Arab Spring was a time when Arab countries started to revolt against their dictators. This all started because of a man named Muhammad Bouazizi. Muhammad, this guy right here, burned himself in protest of the Tunisian government on December 17, 2010. Which resulted in the Tunisian Revolution. On January 14, 2011, Ben Ali, the president, fled the country, inspired many Arab countries to start revolting against their government. This success sparked a series of protests in the Arab world over the next couple of months. These series of protests were the Egyptian Revolution, the Libyan Revolution, the Yemen Revolution, protests in Bahrain, Algeria, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Morocco, Sudan, Mauritania, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Palestine, and of course, motivated the Syrian Revolution. Syria has been ruled by Bashar al-Assad since 2000. His father, Hafiz al-Assad, ruled since 1970. The Assad family has been ruling for over 40 years, and the Syrian people believed it was time to get a new ruler. Assad used brutality to control the people of Syria. He also used sectarian differences in Syria to his advantage. There are two main categories of Muslims. There is Sunni, which is the majority of Muslims, and there's Shia, which has a bunch of subtypes, one being Alawi. Bashar al-Assad happens to be an Alawi. Just for statistics, 75% of people in Syria are Sunni, 10% Christian, 10% Alawi, and 5% other subcategories. The Assads put Alawi at the top of the security state they built. High-ranking officers and military were primarily Alawis. The Syrians began on March 15, 2011 by peacefully protesting. The people would go out and chant every day. On March 18, 2011, only 3 days after they started protesting, the police shot their first protester down. The police continued to brutally suppress the people by killing thousands and jailing hundreds of thousands, but the police couldn't stop the protests. There were protests in hundreds of thousands of towns and cities, so the police couldn't stop them all. Not only that, but there was no clear leader of these protests, so the police couldn't just shoot down a couple guys and shut down all the protests. That won't stop the protests because there's no real leader. The young people in Syria were the ones who started all the protests and led the protests, but there was no central leader. Those young people who started the protests were motivated to start them because they saw through internet and satellite television how the rest of the world has freedom, and they just wanted the same. The internet was a big factor during the protests. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, these were really important in a country where the government controls all media. Using cell phone cameras, people filmed the protests and police shooting them down. The internet delivered these videos to Syrians, but also to the entire world. Assad portrayed the peaceful protests as terrorists with sectarian motivations. He told the Alawi that if the protesters win, then they will kill all the Alawi. Assad made the protests look like they were against Alawi rather than against Assad. After Assad realized that shooting people down with guns wasn't going to be enough to stop the protests, he sent tanks in Dada on April 25th, 2011, in hope that it would suppress the protests. But that didn't happen. In fact, protests grew all over Syria. As a result, the army attacked more and more cities. This went on for months, until people started to finally carry guns for protection. During the time that people started carrying guns, some police officers and military men ran away from their positions to protect the people. The more brutal the government killed people, the more people carried guns. When all of this started to happen, the more extreme people, with the extreme idea to kill everybody involved in the government, got into more power. They were the ones with the guns, so they were the ones that people listened to. The peaceful revolution slowly turned into a civil war between the Sunni-dominated rebels and the Alawi-dominated Assad government. Now the Syrian Civil War is very complicated with many different sides and motives. There's Assad, his police, and his army, who are the government side. Assad is allied with Iran and Russia. There's the opposition, which are a bunch of subgroups which have a loose alliance with each other, who are supported by Qatar, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. You'd think there's only two sides to a war, but there's actually two more. There's ISIS, a terrorist organization who also wants to create a country with or without Assad ruling the rest of Syria. And there's Rojava, who wants to take over territory where the Kurdish minority lives. This war has been going on for more than 4 years now. There are more than 2,500,000 people dead, more than half of the population of refugees within or outside Syria, and immense damage to most Syrian cities. The war doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon, unless someone else comes and doesn't make this war a stalemate anymore. And even if it does end, there is no telling who's going to be Syria's next leader and what it'll look like. Assad did fail to suppress those revolutionaries all those years ago, but he didn't fail to make the Syrian Civil War have a big factor being Sunni versus Alawi.